You're in the water loop.
Waterloop. Hey everyone, this is Travis with Waterloop. I know a lot of people want to use water-efficient fixtures, but they're afraid they won't work as well. Let me tell you about High Sierra Showerheads, which was named Best Showerhead by Popular Science. I just installed one at my house, and I was genuinely surprised at the power and coverage of the water. High Sierra Showerheads earn the EPA WaterSense label for water efficiency. They use at least 40% less water than the conventional low-flow showerheads. High Sierra showerheads are constructed out of metal, so there's no plastic involved, they're very durable, and they're naturally antibacterial. One of my favorite things, these showerheads are made in the USA by a small business located in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Get 20% off with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com. Waterloop. Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. Very excited to talk about Alaska Native culture and water issues today with Marleah LaBelle. She is the owner of Turning Pages Consulting and a freelance writer. Marleah, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very excited to talk to you.
Yeah.
Let's see, as we sit here in June, just for a weather check, it's where I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. We're headed for the low 90s, and
oh wow,
some of our classics, humidity you find in the South also. So what's the day look like there in Alaska?
It is in the 60s.
Oh wow.
It's pretty overcast today, but I actually would prefer this weather than, something like really, really hot.
Yeah.
Last summer, I want to say we had in Anchorage temperatures into like the hundreds, which is not common, because we're situated next to the Chugach Mountains, and, we're also by, the coast, by the ocean. So, we normally have this kind of nice, like really moderate summer. 60s are perfect for me.
Yeah.
I love it. So,
well,
yeah.
I wonder, have you seen kind of the temperatures trending upward in recent summers or even in the winter time, or what are you seeing just like firsthand?
Yes. In Anchorage, I think we're having, probably a more normal summer than we have had in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's other parts of the state, because Alaska is huge. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's like we have over 6,000 miles of coastline. We have over, 500,000 square feet of land. So there's, extremes all across the state with weather. So, for sure. I mean, like there are places that are experiencing, extreme climate change, and Anchorage, we're okay here in the city, but it's the other places in the state where it can become, disastrous.
Sure. Well, we'll dig into that a little bit here as we go on, but could you talk about your heritage and your background as an Alaska Native and about the people?
Sure. So I am Sukbek on my mom's side, and I am Inupiaq on my dad's side. My mom is from Port Graham, Alaska, which is, I think, like 20 miles outside of Homer. So we're on the lower Kenai Peninsula. And my dad's family is from Kotzebue, which is above the Arctic Circle. And I am a tribal member of the native village of Port Graham. And so there are 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska, which is more than a third of all tribes in the entire country. So, it's, I think that's one of the things that's really important for people to know and be aware of is like Alaska is huge, but we also have like very rich and diverse tribes, tribal nations, and cultures and people.
And I don't think that that's something that's commonly known. I don't really think that I realized that there was that many different tribes of indigenous
Mhm.
people in Alaska. I think there's probably most people that you would ask that live in the lower 48, would just say, oh, there's just one, right? There's just the Alaska natives. So that's very interesting. So do you spend a lot of time in Port Graham or growing up there, or what's that like?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in
Mhm.
Anchorage, so which is, the largest city in Alaska. I want to say we have probably more than half of the state's population living in Alaska or in Anchorage. But I did spend a lot of time in Port Graham growing up, and I mean, even now with my own family,
Mhm.
we'll bring our daughters to Port Graham. What is it like? It's it's amazing. It's beautiful. Uh, it's incredible to feel such a connection to a place where I know that my grandparents lived, my great grandparents lived, and actually helped build or establish as a community. So, our ties and our relationship to our land is so much different than the rest of the country. I mean, it's very similar to the other indigenous, the American Indians and Native Americans in the lower 48. I would say it's um, similar experience, but for us, we say Alaska Native people have been here for the last 10,000 years
Mm.
at least. So,
Wow. Yeah, incredible. And could you talk about the place of water in, your culture and in kind of daily life, if you will?
sure. So it and thank you for saying that, because I think with a place that has so many tribes and so many different cultures, we often say we can't speak for all Alaska Native people, and but I could say that water is sacred for Alaska Native people. We view it as sacred. Um, we believe that we are part of the environment. We are just as much a part of the environment as any other living being in the environment. So subsistence is extremely important to most of rural Alaska. Uh, Grocery stores, for one thing, are not we don't have large grocery stores in our small villages and communities, and but more importantly than that, it is a part of our culture. It's a part of our history that we hunt and we fish and we live off of the land. We are a part of the land. So water is very, very important to that. And I mean, especially for where my mom is from, it's, it is a maritime culture. It is on Port Graham Bay, which is off of the Kachemak Bay. And so water is extremely important to our culture. And I mean, also just, transportation.
Hmm.
One of the things that I like to say is that, the Sugpiaq people were the original inventor of what we know as the kayak.
Hmm.
So if anybody out there in the world enjoys kayaking,
There you
those
go.
are my ancestors. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I see a couple of, iconic water creatures kind of on the wall. You've got the orca back there and the probably humpback whale tail coming up. So those are pretty prevalent around those parts.
Yeah.
I want to ask also about access to water and sanitation, drinking water and sanitation. Again, you've got this huge place that Alaska is. You've got the 200 and something different tribes. You've got lots of different villages and situations. So sure, there's variety. But how would you describe kind of the situation with access to drinking water, clean drinking water, sanitation? How many Alaska Natives kind of lack access to those things too?
Sure. So according to the state of Alaska, there are about 30 communities in Alaska that are considered unserved. And unserved being where more than half of the community does not have pipes, does not have a covered hall system, or does not have septic or tank. And in terms of like a population number of people, that's about 7,000 people that do not have an adequate, supply or, access to water. And for the other communities, that are outside the major cities or what we call hubs, we have, Alaska's broken down into about 12 different regions because it's so big, so to get access to those different parts of Alaska, there are hub communities that have that provide the access to the other smaller villages, and so those places have more infrastructure than the smaller communities. But so even the 30 communities that don't have an adequate supply of water or access to water, the other communities that do have water, their systems are aging, and they're about 50, 60 years old. They're essentially kind of held together by what they call band-aids, and they're in extreme disrepair. And so for the 30 communities that are considered unserved, what they use and rely on are they have to haul water themselves. There is normally a water treatment plant, but there isn't pipes, so they have to go and collect the water themselves. They have to bring containers. They're typically in I want to say garbage cans. They bring they're clean garbage cans, but they have to haul it back to their home. And they also use what are called honey buckets. Not a glamorous thing. It's essentially a bucket that they use inside their home for their sewer.
And then go dispose of that on a regular basis somewhere.
Yeah, the whole process is dependent on the homeowner, the person. They have to take care of their own water, collecting their own water, disposing of their own honey bucket. So most of the time it's a bucket, with a toilet seat. They'll have a garbage bag inside the bucket that collects their urine and their feces, and they take care of it themselves. And so
yeah. And like I said, there's a variety of access. This is kind of like the situation that's the lowest, if you will, like the least access. But then there's probably communities, villages that have some more amenities, if you will, but still not ideal situations. Is that fair to say?
It is. In some communities, they are able to have maybe just a sewer connection without a piped water, or maybe they have an individual well for their home. So there are definitely different systems in place for the community, and really what is able to work in the community. So I think there are some septic hall situations, like I think there are some villages where they are able to go and have a septic tank that'll go and collect the waste from the homes, but they still have to go and collect water themselves.
Mm-hmm. How much? And so I'm curious then, what do these conditions mean for people? How does it impact their health, not just physical health, but mental health, emotional health? How you feel as a person, but of course the physical health piece too.
Right. So, as we all know, water is extremely important for maintaining our health and well-being. We need it for hand washing. We need it for hygiene. We need it to be able to have a clean home. And we need it for drinking water as well. I mean, we oftentimes kind of forget that piece. And so for communities that don't have, an adequate access to water, what is typically seen is there's, just a higher incidence in
That's right.
infectious diseases. So, I mean, like, for example, COVID-19. So we also see, pneumonia, skin infections, bacterial infections like gastrointestinal distress. And so what happens also when, folks don't have the access, they're rationing the amount of water that they use. They're not using enough water. And so the World Health Organization recommends that, like, the average person in like an extreme conditions, there's like this minimum amount of water that they need to be using, which is roughly about 20 gallons of water per person per day. And for villages that don't have, a pipe system, that have to haul water themselves, they're using very, very, low numbers of water. It's like maybe about 9, in some cases, 9 gallons of water per person per day for all of those things. So hand washing, drinking water, cleaning and whatnot. So cooking is another. So what happens is they have a hand basin, like they're washing their hands in a basin, and they're reusing that water, all day because they have to. Yeah. So, I mean, like they're not able to, just have this, endless amount of water. So they're reusing the water in their hand basin and, not drinking enough water. So they're also, doing other things other than drinking water, right? So they're consuming sugary sweetened beverages, which, also lead to other, health disparities.
Sure. Wow. Yeah, like you said, and all those other physical issues that can come from this rationing and reusing of water. Well, let's I guess turn to the positive side, if you will, and what kinds of things have been done, can be done, are planned to try to improve that access and sanitation. What progress has been made? What are some success stories? I guess there's 10 questions in one there, but yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to say everyone. I mean, but people are aware that, at least within Alaska, that, that we do have communities that are unserved, that aren't getting enough water, that aren't having, their optimal health. And so the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium actually designed what is called the Portable Alternative Sanitation System. And that is for communities that are unserved. And so it is essentially an in-home sanitation system. There is a separating toilet. There's a water storage tank that's inside the home where they can have, 50 or 100 gallons of water for their home. And that water storage tank is also connected to a low flow sink. So people, they're able to wash their hands and have hand washing. And so that has made, some improvements for some communities that are using them. And so right now there are. Sorry.
No, yeah, we can tell people, well, I guess viewers and listeners, that you live near a local airport, and as people probably know, there's a lot of small, flights, small planes, right? That people use to get around out there. So, and
Yeah.
it's summer and a nice day in Alaska, so off they go. Anyway,
Yeah.
you were saying that that system has helped in some communities and in some households.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is kind of more widely being used in Muktivik, which is the new village site for Newtok, who has had to relocate because of climate change. But it's also being used in Kivalina, and there are also another community that is in the process of relocating. But it's more widely used in those two communities. There are some communities in the interior where it's also being used, but I guess in some ways it is still in the research and development phase. They're still making improvements to it. And I believe that, there will be efforts made to have it more widely, distributed beyond those handful of communities that have it now.
I used to work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and their Office of Water in D.C., and I know EPA has a program, to assist with water and sanitation for Alaska Natives. Does that program make an impact?
It does, and I want to say that they have been involved with some of the relocation effort planning for our environmentally threatened communities. And so in terms of, working with the local EPA coordinators, I think they've done a really great job of really instilling the need for, training and getting the people in the communities, really being able to take control and have some tools and be able to do their own planning.
Yeah, makes sense. I wanted to ask about kind of at this time right now. There's really in our country, especially in the lower 48, there's all this upheaval around social justice and equity and people of color, being disproportionately impacted in so many different ways, and environmental justice being part of that, right? You can't have equity, you can't have social justice without environmental justice. Is this is kind of the the turmoil that's happening in the lower 48 and being felt in Alaska? Is there some, just kind of what's going on there in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. I actually, me myself, took my daughters to protest, after George Floyd was murdered, and so I did want to share this statement from the Alaska Federation of Natives, and AFN for short. It is our oldest and largest statewide Native organization. And so they issued this statement earlier this month that they stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I would say that is the general, feeling amongst, Alaska Native people, is that we stand in solidarity with those impacted by, racism, by institutional racism, by just being marginalized, and efforts to, essentially erase us as a people. And so, we have experienced, Alaskan Native people have experienced this. We know what it feels like. We know what it looks like. And for sure, I want to say that there's been protests all across the state, even in, little tiny communities. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
And is the feeling that the environmental justice, that the disproportionate access to water and sanitation is part of that bigger picture?
Absolutely. So, I think that is, a part of, what it feels like to be a marginalized person, community. And so, like I said, we know what it looks like. We know what it feels like. We know what those injustices are. So, absolutely. And there are, other Native communities in the lower 48 that are definitely experiencing climate change, maybe not to the degree that villages here in Alaska are, but certainly there is flooding, there is coastal erosion. So I would say, it's one of those things where it's, people can see that where there is, a lack of funding or a lack of assistance.
Sure. Well, on climate change, you've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's something I definitely have a few questions about. You've mentioned communities that even have to be relocated. So could you just talk broadly about the climate change impacts on Alaska Natives?
Sure. So, yes, in Alaska, we are experiencing rapid climate change, like highly accelerated, more than any other, place in the country. Where what we have in Alaska, and especially in the more northern parts of Alaska, is what's called permafrost. And the permafrost is ground that, where I want to say like 70% of it stays frozen all year round. But because of rising temperatures, that permafrost is melting and liquefying. And if you have a building, if you have infrastructure, that's going to get impacted by that melting, that permafrost, degradation. That's so we have in 2009 the GAO developed a report on environmentally threatened communities. So, mind you, this was like over 10 years ago. There were 31 communities, and this is all in Alaska, that were considered environmentally threatened. But climate change has not slowed down since then. And so we actually have 73 communities that meet the criteria for environmentally threatened. There are a whole bunch more that are, experiencing some levels of climate change, but not to the degree where, the village, the community needs to make some serious planning for, saving critical infrastructure or having to make the tough decision to move.
Yeah, and those communities that have had to move, or are in the process, what's that like? I mean, so is that because of the permafrost? Is that because of sea level rise? Like, what's led to those relocations, and then what's that process of relocating like?
Sure. So there has been just one community in Alaska that has relocated some of its community members, and that is Newtok. And so they've it's been many years of planning, and so just this last year in October, September, families were actually able to begin to move their entire house, all their family members to their new village site, Muktivik. And and it's also, it's a very expensive. It's, as I said, many years of planning. And so altogether, I think the entire relocation for the native village of Newtok will be upwards of 150 million.
Wow.
To move a village of about 400 people, and so they're going in phases. So community members that were closest to the erosion, particularly elders, had priority to move to Muktivik, and Newtok, my goodness, experienced it all. They experienced, permafrost degradation, they experienced erosion, and they experienced flooding. So essentially, their entire village was just, getting swallowed by water, kind of on all sides. On one side, on the river side, they're experiencing erosion, but on the other side, they were also experiencing flooding. So,
yeah. And what was it like for those people, to have to leave a place that was their home? Maybe it was their home for generations,
sure.
to leave this place and go someplace new. Aside from the logistics of it, the emotional, spiritual side of that experience.
Right. I would say for the adults and the elders, I think there was a sense of hope that, life is going to be better for them in Muktivik. They're going to be on more stable, solid ground. They're going to have better access to, water and sanitation. The air is going to be, better, have a, better quality air in Muktivik than in Newtok. This is something that's, probably hard for people to visualize, but Newtok is what we call a boardwalk community. There's no roads, and not even like gravel roads. It's just all wooden boardwalks. It's very muddy. It's tundra, and so I guess it's kind of hard to really explain without people really being able to see it and experience it firsthand. But so the air is going to be much better in Muktivik. I would say the younger generation, I think, had a harder time with moving to Muktivik. Newtok is the only home that they've known. So, but for the adults and the elders, I would say that they were for sure looking forward to improved housing and improved health.
Yeah. More broadly, when it comes to climate change and the impacts that are happening there rapidly and so intensely, what else is just kind of being done about resilience and adapting to this, to these impacts?
Sure. So, Kivalina is also in the process of moving, of relocating. They have built a road to their new village site, and so it's but for communities that are experiencing climate change, they are just having to make adaptations to their community. They're having to make adjustments. There's efforts to build sea walls to protect the community from erosion or extreme storms that they might experience. It's weather, I think, has become very unpredictable for much of Alaska, particularly in the fall and spring, which is when I think that there are more storms than in recent memory. So
that seems to be something that's happening in a lot of places, is just this unpredictability, like the wild swings in precipitation and intense storms and just things coming through. I mean, feel like I've witnessed that in the mid-Atlantic here on the, the East Coast where I am. It's just kind of wacky weather patterns.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. I think it's, I think it makes life a little more unsettling, a little more scary, a little, when we aren't able to predict the weather, it can be challenging. And I think that there has been, probably some studies done that show the emotional toll that can take on communities experiencing, climate change. So for sure, it's, it's strange times we're living in.
One thing I didn't have on my list, but just popped into my head, is Bristol Bay. And I know that there's been for years, there's been, efforts to get this Pebble Mine built, but this is like one of the world's most amazing fisheries for salmon.
Right.
Yeah, just kind of wondering about perspective on, tapping into water resources in that way. No, I guess that's not tapping into water resources, it's tapping into the mining, but it could be jeopardizing a water resource. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not I'm not from the Bristol Bay region.
Sure.
I think it's always it can be challenging. It can be dicey for us as Native people to speak on a place that we're not from. And I would say that probably the vast majority of the people in the region, the Alaska Native people in the region in Bristol Bay, are opposed to the mine. There are, a small minority that support it.
Jobs, right? Yeah.
Right. Economic development and jobs, absolutely. That is a challenge for most of rural Alaska is, there are very few jobs. There's, especially now, with the pandemic, it's, and our oil prices declining, and we've actually had to shut down production of oil because of the pandemic. So, and that's, our major source of, revenue for the state of Alaska. So I would say that people are, divided on the issue. I think what is, troubling too is, making any sort of changes to, the policies that are in place to protect water and, open, places up for mining or, oil and gas development. And I think what is extremely crucial is, getting the people who live there, you have to involve them. It has to be, something that they are completely involved in at the very beginning, as soon as possible, as early as possible. And I personally do not support the Pebble Mine project. I think there are probably better ways that the project could take place, or
yeah, sure. Well, good. Well, I'm so glad we caught up, and you could share all this perspective. Like I said, I think that a lot of people in the lower 48 here aren't that versed in Alaska and Alaska natives, and so I really appreciate you sharing all the information and perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Waterloop.
The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish choice for conserving water, energy, and money while enjoying an invigorating shower. Use promo code WATERLOOP for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
You're in the Waterloop.
you.